Hello everyone, my name is Dorothy Gallo, Superintendent of the Hingham Public Schools, and we're here today for the 18th episode of Superintendent Spotlight. Very excited about this episode, a little bit different in the sense that typically I have a number of people that we interview in a couple of segments of the show. Today we have just one person, and you'll see why it's only one person when you find out all that we have to tell you. So my guest today is Chrissy O'Connor. Chrissy is a social studies teacher at Hingham High School, and she's been there since about 2002.
Yes.
So Chrissy, tell us a little bit about, I think you grew up in Western Mass.
I did.
And so when you went to school and how you ended up at Hingham.
Sure. So I did grow up in Western Mass. I grew up in a small town called New Salem on the Quabbin Reservoir, and I went to public schools there, very small schools. And
was it a regional?
It was
school?
a regional school, regional high school, middle school and high school. I think when I graduated, it was for 4 towns, and there were something like 80 or 82 students in my class.
Wow.
So much smaller than Hingham High.
Yes.
But when I graduated, I went to Mount Holyoke College for my bachelor's degree, and I got my degree in American Studies. And after graduation, I worked in corporate life for a few years, but during college, I had been a substitute teacher at my own high school, actually. And I had education in the back of my mind and teaching in the back of my mind, and so knew that that was where I wanted to head. And so I went to graduate school at Brown University and got my Master of Arts in Teaching Social Studies. And that spring, when I was finishing up at Brown, I sent my resume to a lot of different schools in Rhode Island and back in Massachusetts, where I had been from. I'd been living in Boston before I went to grad school in Providence. And Jim Kirkcaldy was one of the first people to call me up and offer me an interview. And it was the first interview I had, and thankfully he offered me the job.
And we're thankful as well.
So that was a long time ago. That was 14 years ago, and I'm unbelievably about to start my 15th year teaching here.
And just for our audience members who may not know who Jim Kirkcaldy is, Jim was a long time chair of the Social Studies Department for K-12, and he officially retired 2 years ago. However, he still does come every day and teach one AP course. So what are the courses that you've been teaching over the years at Hingham?
I've always taught U.S. history. So when I first started, it was an American Studies co-taught course with English. And I also have taught our upper standard U.S. history course, and then occasionally a different elective here and there. Now I teach advanced placement U.S. history, and I teach upper standard U.S. history, and I teach some sections of government. It's called American Political Systems. It's a senior elective, 1 semester long. And this year I'll also begin teaching a new elective on World War II.
We're going to talk about that.
Right.
So that's exciting.
Right.
And when we say upper standard, that's a in-house logo. Our upper standard courses are our regular college prep courses, whereas the AP and honors level courses are on a different track. So Chrissy has always been very, very involved in all the activities at the high school. It seems that you have been an advisor to just about everything. Class advisor in a number of different classes is one. Tell us some of the other extracurricular kinds of things you've done.
I've been a class advisor for a long time. So I watched the class of 05 graduate, 09, 13, and I'm about to usher in the class of 17 with their senior year, so that's very exciting.
So that's a busy year.
That is a busy year, yes, and I advised that class with Zach Raymond, who's an English teacher at the high school. And in the past, I've also been involved with student council and, let's see, freshman advisory. Those have been some of my bigger
initiatives, because you were a leader in getting that going.
Yes.
And now we're talking about a sophomore advisory on the horizon, but I'm not sure how far out.
Nice.
So Chrissy, as you can tell, with her background and with her personality and with all the extracurricular activities, has received honors and awards among many. We're going to talk about a particular one today, but just last year she was named the Massachusetts Patricia Bering Teacher of the Year, and that's an award that comes through National History Day, which we'll talk about in a minute. And She also has for 2 years been participating in a program, only 18 teachers each year in the U.S. for this program, and Chrissy's the only one from Massachusetts, and that's a program called Understanding Sacrifice, and that's what we're going to focus on in most of the rest of this episode. So we will come back to that one. But I seem to remember something you participated in a number of years ago that involved the John Adams house.
Yes.
Because I remember going there.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I have been lucky enough to participate in a lot of professional development programs over the summers. And so the John Adams program was many years ago with a lot of different scholars who came in. David McCullough,
Yes.
Joseph Ellis, who was a mentor of mine at Mount Holyoke. And that program was at the Adams House and at the Massachusetts Historical Society for a week. And so we were lucky enough to participate in that. There were a couple of Hingham teachers involved in that program. I've also been involved in some Gilder Lehrman seminars and some National Endowment for the Humanities seminars, which have been great.
So you basically apply for anything that you see.
In the summer, yes. It's so, to me, it's really important to continue to be a student of history, and it's given me a nice opportunity to travel around the country. A long time ago, 2004, I was able to go to Pearl Harbor as part of the NEH seminars. I've been to Alabama to do a civil rights seminar, which led to an elective that I taught for several years at the high school. I've done a variety of different summer programs. Prior to Understanding Sacrifice, which we'll talk about, I also traveled with students for 3 summers, and so I got some global travel in too, which was great. We went to Borneo for a month and Peru for 2 weeks, and a few summers ago we went to South Africa for a month. So I've done a lot of travel in the summer.
So Hingham has been participating for many years in the National History Day competition, and both at the middle school level, at the high school level, and it seems that our students have done very well at the state level, and a number have had opportunity to go on to the national competition. But I didn't realize until recently that there was any more to National History Day than the competitions each year. But there is more, and that is how you became involved in this Understanding Sacrifice. So tell us what that program is. How did you find out about it? What kind of an application process did you have to go through? Things like that.
Sure. So the Understanding Sacrifice program is a contract from the American Battle Monuments Commission, which is a government agency that runs all of the cemeteries abroad for our fallen service members. And National History Day won this contract along with the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. And so all of these organizations work together to create this program. The ABMC has, as I mentioned, for many years catered to the families of the fallen. And as new generations arrive, those new generations don't know as much about that history. And so the American Battle Monuments Commission has started to shift their focus a little bit to including educational programs to teach about what this history is. And so that's the origin of this particular project. And so National History Day and the Center for History and New Media work together to create this program for teachers. So I learned about it, I think online, whether I got a newsletter from National History Day or I saw a post about it, and immediately it piqued my interest. I saw it over the summer of 2014, I suppose, at the end of that summer. And I'd always wanted to go to Normandy, and I saw that was included in this program, not understanding how much more it would cover. But I also appreciated the program was 12 months long. And so we applied for early September. It was an application that included an essay and a writing sample and some letters of support from your administrators and your resume.
Was that the first year the program existed?
That was the first year, yes. And so their focus was on World War II in Northern Europe. And so the focus was on England and Northern France and Belgium in particular. And so the applications were due in early September, and the program kicked off in November. And so the program is a full year, not just the travel in the summer,
Right.
which I think everyone knows about and wants to
Right.
hear a lot about the trip,
Yeah.
which is an incredible opportunity. But also it's a year of academic study, and also along with that, a year of hands-on research as well as curriculum development before the field study.
So how the gentleman that you researched in the first year, how did you, were you assigned that individual, or did you have some ability to choose someone? How does that process work?
Sure. So as part of the program, each teacher chooses one fallen hero that they will research over the course of the year. And so I was assigned a particular cemetery that we would be visiting.
Okay.
I was assigned the Henri Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium.
In Belgium. Okay.
And so at first, my goal was to see if there were any Hingham men who were buried or memorialized at that cemetery.
Ah.
And there are not. And so then I expanded my scope to looking at Massachusetts men, ideally either from my own hometown or from someplace on the South Shore. And so you can find databases of the names of the men, and then you have to do some research to cross-check who's buried in Henri Chapelle. And in the end, you come up with a list of names, and you just have to make a choice.
Yeah. So you choose from the final list that you
Right.
have.
So I got to choose the name, but in many ways it was very random because there wasn't somebody from Hingham. There wasn't someone from my hometown.
Right.
And so I chose a man from Marion, Massachusetts, because I thought that might give me some closer geographical access to some historical records.
And are you given a set of resources, or pretty much on your own as to how you find out information about this person?
So the program does apply for the records from the military, an OMPF, a military personnel file it's called, as well as an IDPF, a deceased personnel file. And so there is money in that contract to provide those resources. However, not every fallen hero has those resources, whether it's because the records were destroyed in a 1973 fire that was devastating in the archives in St. Louis,
Oh my goodness.
ruining many, many, many records. Or the records were somehow misplaced or lost or whatever the case. I was lucky enough to get my fallen hero. His name was Clark Bradford Allen Jr. I was lucky enough to get his records, and so I had those records. And I also spent a lot of time on Ancestry.com, and I also spent a lot of time, thankfully Marion has a robust historical society and quite a few records on the internet. And so a lot of those scanned records, in fact, the first photograph I ever saw of Clark was when I clicked on an article that the Marion Historical Society had put online.
Oh.
That was kind of a really neat moment when you first see the face of this person that you know you're going to spend the year with.
Would you make any effort to try to reach family if family was still there, or is
Yes.
that something they would
Yes.
rather you not do?
No, they encourage
They
you to reach out
encourage
to
that.
family. I think many families at this point, either they know lots about the story or they don't know anything about the story. And lots of families, I think, are happy to participate and support the research. I was less successful in finding family members that were able to help with research, although I did find a niece who sent me some information and a few additional photographs. And I also was able to reach out to alumni organizations that Clark and his brothers had been part of that helped me. It's sort of this really interesting hunt for information. It's like a treasure hunt. You're just sort of digging and digging and digging, and that's the really cool part of history and historical research.
So you're really getting to know this person.
You're getting to know this person as best as you can, and also getting to know the research process really well. This is research that nobody has done before. Clark Allen was a 22-year-old man who was killed in service to our country, and he didn't really have a chance to make a mark beyond the age of 22 the way that many of us do. And so his story is one of thousands of stories of average Americans who are not famous and don't appear in the index of books. And so you really have to dig to find this information.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there is a website for Understanding Sacrifice, and we'll talk a bit about what, in addition to a video clip that we're going to show in a minute, in addition to that, what is on the website. But I've viewed that video clip a number of times, and it really is people like Chrissy, who are other teachers across the country who were talking about their research and their fallen hero. And I'm always struck when I watch it about the emotion with which they speak, almost as if they met this young person because they've gotten to know through the research so much. So we're going to play that video for our audience. It's only 3.5 or so minutes long, and we'll come back and chat again. But let's break and see the video and watch for Chrissy on it, because she's one of the people that will be speaking with the other educators who were part of her group.
Seeing a place, being there geographically shapes how I learn, and I wanted to be able to offer that to my students.
After spending almost a year reading about these events, and then the chance to stand here and to think about the scale of it.
You're right here in the thick of things. What you studied at home, you're actually seeing and doing and working with when you touch down in Europe.
You can study about it and think about it, but there's nothing like walking in it.
You know, what it really looks like in the hedgerows, and what it looks like on the beaches of Normandy. And to be able to describe that in a personal way to my students.
For years we've spent our lives dedicated to these things, to studying the past, and this gives us a chance to actually go and live it.
This experience has changed me by making me think more about the individual stories of wartime and not just the big picture.
It's one thing to learn about how many soldiers died in what beach or what campaign, but it's another thing to come to know one of those individuals.
There's a family, there's heartache, there's emotions behind every single one of those numbers.
Making this war personal is the only way we make it real for kids. Being able to use the men buried in the ABMC cemeteries from our hometowns gives us an incredible tool for teaching.
To get students to think critically and conduct research, and that really helps the students think more deeply about the topic.
It really opens your eyes and refreshes, you know, first of all, your love of history, because you're doing real research.
Finding documents, spending time looking at the little details, to find family members, to look in places that are not obvious for information.
And second of all, you're doing meaningful research.
And I feel that as American citizens, it's our responsibility to kind of tell those stories.
These are the voices of World War II that we don't often hear. These are the voices that were quieted way too early.
This is the first person I know to ever die in a war, and I really feel like I know him and I know his story.
You make a connection and you get very possessive with your individual, and then it becomes a point where you feel like you don't want to let that person down.
More than anything, I want you to know that you made a difference. You mattered. You are not forgotten. You will never be forgotten. It has been my absolute honor to get to know you.
You're going to be creating something meaningful, not just for your classroom or other teachers to use, but also for the families of these men and women who sacrificed their lives.
I think many of these families must have feared that their loved ones would be forgotten. And I think we have a unique opportunity to bring these amazing places to life and to help them understand that these aren't just cemeteries or graveyards, that these are places that are alive, that these are places of history, and they're places to learn from.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I've enjoyed it in the several times I've watched it. The video came from the website understanding sacrifice, but what are some of the other things that are on that website, Chrissy?
Sure. On abmceducation.org, you can find obviously the video that we just showed, but also you can find biographies of all of the fallen heroes that have been studied. So all 18 of the fallen heroes, the teachers from the first phase of the program did, are all there. And this November, by Veterans Day, we'll debut the next set of 18. In addition to the biographies of those fallen heroes, there are also lesson plans for teachers across the country or globally,
Whether
really.
you were involved in the program or not.
Right,
those
absolutely.
Are there for people to use.
The curriculum is there for people to use, mostly for middle school and high school grades, but in different disciplines. So mine obviously is a history lesson.
Sure.
But there are also English teachers and art
didn't know that.
teachers and science teachers involved as well. There's some math involved. So teachers of all different disciplines might be able to find something that they'd like to implement in their classrooms.
Wow.
Yes.
So you participated then in through an application process, obviously, again, for a second year, and in the second year you were accepted, which is terrific for us and for you, I'm sure, and all the kids who benefit. But what about the person you chose in the second year? Tell us about her.
Right, so I was really lucky to be able to participate again, and the second phase focused not on Northern Europe like the first year, but on the Mediterranean. So we learned a lot about North Africa, and we learned about the Italian campaign and Southern France up into Northern Europe. And so this year, my fallen hero was a woman named Rose Puchala, and she was a member of the Women's Army Corps, and she is memorialized in the North Africa American Cemetery. So unfortunately, we weren't able to visit Tunisia due to the unsafe travel conditions there, which was really sad, actually, kind of devastating to know what it's like to be able to stand at the grave of the fallen hero that you've spent this time learning about, and to not be able to go to pay my respects to her in person. Rose is on the wall of the missing. Her name is on the wall of the missing in Tunisia because she was killed in a plane accident, a plane crash, off of the Ivory Coast on May 30th, 1945. With 17 other WACs and a crew of 3 men flying the plane. It's the largest single loss of life for women during World War II. Rose was from Minnesota, and the reason that I chose a fallen hero from Minnesota was because this year I really did want to focus on the story of a woman who was involved in the Second World War, because there were many. Over 150,000 alone were members of the Women's Army Corps, and that's just one.
I had no idea.
Right, yeah, it's a huge number, and that was just one of the types of programs that women could take part in. And there were no women from Massachusetts who were memorialized in North Africa. And so of the women who are memorialized in North Africa, I chose a woman from Minnesota simply because my own mother is from Minnesota, and I felt some connection there. And Rose's story is different than Clark's. She had a very difficult upbringing, a lot of challenges in her family. Her mom was a very hardworking single mother. She came from a rural area, moved to Minneapolis, and did not complete her schooling. She went to school through the 8th grade, and then she and her siblings began to work to help support the family. She was working at Foley Manufacturing, which I realized when I started this research that I had one of their products in my kitchen. Lots of people, I think, have a Foley food mill. And those are
not known for my cooking.
I managed to have one in my cabinets.
Oh my goodness.
And those were made at this factory in Minneapolis. And so she was working there before she signed up to be in the Women's Army Corps. And she was a bit older when she joined than some of the women, than the average age for women. And so because of that life experience and her work experience, she was sent abroad. Many of the women in the Women's Army Corps stayed stateside.
Yes.
Those that went abroad were for particular purposes, and those that went to North Africa were a bit older than the rest.
And you were able to find out more about her life because she enjoyed more.
Yes, I was.
Life before.
And I was lucky enough to find a family member, again, through Ancestry.com.
Okay.
You sort of cast this really wide net, and as you're building a family tree on Ancestry, I built one for the Allen family, and I built one for the Puchalas. And as you build these trees, you realize that the same people you're adding to your tree are on somebody else's. And so I emailed a lot of different people to say, might you have any connection to this person that I'm researching? This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm asking.
Right.
And I would love your help
Feedback,
if you have some. And so luckily I was able to find someone who was related, and she helped me with some family stories and some photographs. Again, the first time I saw a photo of Rose, it came from an email from a family member, and it was a really powerful moment. So hopefully we can share some of those, both of Rose and of Clark.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. As we've been chatting, a number of photographs and some documents are being displayed over us for the audience to enjoy. So there are things like photographs that you found, some photographs of you doing different activities?
Yes. There are also some photographs of me on the trips, both last year and this year. Yes.
Okay. Is there any opportunity for the families to see what the research you've accumulated, and does it end up in the form of a report, or what is the final product that, that you get?
Each of the cemeteries will get all of our research, so that if somebody ever comes to visit Clark Allen's grave, the cemeteries will know that he was part of this program, and we'll have some research.
Oh, great.
And same with Rose, Puchala. And then of course the website, so a quick search of Clark Bradford Allen Jr. now, whereas 2 years ago there was so little. It was so hard for me to find any information about him with a Google search. But now that website, ABMC Education, will be one of the first hits. I also shared research with the Marion Historical Society, and I wrote an article for the local paper in Marion to tell Clark's story.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And that ran last August. And an interesting story related to that is that when that piece ran, I talked about visiting Henri Chapelle, and I talked about the memorial in Marion that has the names of the young men who died in service to the nation during the war. And a woman reached out to me and connected me with the daughter of another man from Marion who was killed in the war and is also buried at Henri Chapelle.
Oh my goodness, what a coincidence.
Yes, his name was Vern Robinson, and he served as a first lieutenant, as somebody who helped create camouflage buildings and camouflage army installations, essentially, to trick the enemy into thinking that certain things were in some places and not in others. And he was killed by a V-2 rocket in Antwerp. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there picking up paint. But I was able to meet his daughter, who never met her father. She was born just as he was deploying, and 13 months later he was killed in the war. She never met him, but she has worked hard to recreate his story, and so she wrote a follow-up article about her dad after the one that I had published in August, and so that was those are the kinds of really interesting connections that I think this has helped build. So,
inspired by your visit, I'm sure.
Yes.
Last year, you've done some local research of the, I think it's 30 or so Hingham veterans who died in World War II. And so what did you come up with during the local research? And that was something the students were involved in.
Yes. So when I came home, I just knew that given the rich history of Hingham and also the care that Hingham takes to preserve its history, I knew that there would be stories to uncover about the men who were killed as part of the Second World War from Hingham. And there are 30 on the honor roll, They are featured right as you walk into town hall. And so I wanted to learn a bit more about their stories. And so just by reaching out to our veteran services officer and our town historian and librarians at the Hingham Public Library, I started to do a little bit of research. And there's still so much more to do. So I've just begun that process with students. But one of the people that I was introduced to last year was Mr. Tom Studley, who is a Hingham resident and is a World War II veteran. And so his good friend, Edward Rand Howard, enlisted in the Army with Eddie, with Tom, and their friend Al. The day that Eleanor Roosevelt came to visit Hingham.
Oh, the reported visit.
Yes, yes.
So it's not just, there's a legend about Eleanor Roosevelt driving down Main Street in Hingham, and that she said this is the prettiest Main Street in America. So we've always said, well, it's a legend, but now we have evidence she really was here. Whether she said that or not might be another matter.
Right. So they enlisted in January of 1942, and Tom and Eddie were tent mates in the Pacific, and Eddie was killed in a plane crash, but they didn't know what had happened. His remains were not discovered for many, many years, and he's now buried at Arlington National Cemetery, but was a friend and tent mate of Mr. Studley's. And so through talking with Mr. Studley and learning more about his wartime experience, I knew that I wanted my students to learn more about Eddie Howard, who, by the way, grew up just one house away from the high school on Pleasant Street. So the connections were really, really tight. And all you have to do is go down to the library to open up the yearbook and see both of their photographs in the yearbook.
And those connections include, there was an Edith Howard, related to Teddy, who was a longtime teacher, AP teacher at Hingham High School, and Tom Studley that you mentioned, when he came back from the war, worked for the Hingham Public Schools. So.
Yes, yes. So it's been a real gift to build a friendship with Mr. Studley and with his wife. And he's been very generous in sharing his stories and those stories about Eddie Howard, as well as helping me find other people to reach out to ask. And he's also been very kind to welcome my students into his home to share those same stories with them as well, which has been a really wonderful connection. So all of our students, or all of my students in one of my classes, or two of my classes rather, learned about Eddie Howard through Ancestry K-12, which is a grant to provide Ancestry.com access to our students. So while they're at the school, they know our IP address, and so they know we're logging on from school, and so all of those records are available to them as well. So we all did some research on Eddie Howard, and two of my students did more detailed research on him and wrote biographies of him. So Edward Rand Howard was really sort of the focus of our Hingham Fallen Hero research this year. However, some of my other students also did some research on Boris Demko, who was a young man who was also killed in service to the country during the war.
And whose brother is still active in town government.
Yes, and so the two students who focused on Boris Demko, in part because there is an island named after him off of 3A.
Just as you enter Hingham.
Right. Which, you know, we've all passed so many times. And so I think for these students, it was really interesting to say, like, oh my gosh, I've driven by that a million times. And that actually, that name really means something. And so our Veteran Services Officer, Keith German, who's
my nephew, by the way.
Perfect.
Everything's connected.
Was generous to be able to arrange an interview between his brother and my students, and so his brother brought letters from Boris, some certificates, and some other documents and artifacts that had belonged to Boris Demko, and these are just very powerful things for students to access. This is history that hasn't been done before. It's not on every website and in
Right.
every textbook, and this kind of original research is super powerful, especially when they realize that these were people that also went to Hingham High and played the same sports that they did, and they just were from a different time. But know the
So
town.
you've been able to embed a lot of this into the social studies curriculum for the courses that you're teaching.
Yes.
U.S. history, but now, next year, this coming year, we're going to have an elective. And so what are the kinds of things that you will be able to do in the elective? Will it be more of the research?
Yes. So I'm very grateful and excited to be able to teach this elective. It's a senior elective, so it's a whole semester on the Second World War. And so not only will we be able to cover the history of the war, although I'm sure I could do that for a full year and 2 years and on, but we'll do the best we can. We'll work on understanding more about the European theater, the Pacific theater, the home front, but a large component of this will also be research in Hingham. And so I'm very thankful to the HEF for a grant that they provided to let me request all of those records from the archives
Oh, so
and
you have to
from
request
the
those
military.
separately
Yes.
from the project.
Yes. So to be able to request those, and they're not free. So this grant will help support the acquisition of those files, which I think will be a town resource once we have those.
Absolutely.
And so the students will work on research on the 29 other young men who were killed beyond Eddie Howard in service during the war. And so the idea is that, and this is the first time through, so we'll see how things unfold, but the idea is that they will work on creating a biography just as I did for Clark Allen and for Rose Puchala on each of those 30 men, and to be able to present that and make that a public resource.
And as we try to stay in tune with the times and improve education in Hingham, we much more in all of our disciplines try to focus on much more on kids being active and involved and committed to real research and project-based learning. Is another phrase that we hear a lot, and so these are terrific examples of kids really getting engaged. And the other E word that we are using a lot more lately is not only engaged in learning and engaged in the different activities, but empowered. And empowered in ways of, now I know how to do some research on my own, and that's something that can carry into areas other than this particular project about World War II.
Absolutely. This is hard research. There are dead ends. It can sometimes be that you don't get the file that you want, or that you can't find a surviving family member, or something that you thought you found didn't come through, or whatever. There are dead ends in this research, and it's important that when we encounter those, we don't get too frustrated. We try another way, and I think this is a really important way for them to do that.
And that's what makes it different, authentic, different from having topics that are assigned and then wheeling in the book cart from the library with books where you will be able to find that. That's certainly something that younger students need to learn, but the authentic research, you're right, there are a lot of dead ends. That's the way life is, a lot of dead ends at times. So.
And I think having done this work myself also helps me help them. So having just done this for 2 years, I understand how it feels. And I also have been able to build sort of a set of tools to say, okay, that didn't work, so let's try something else. And I think too, not only is that helpful for me as their teacher, I think too that it's useful for them to know that I'm doing it too. So we're in it together.
So in addition to learning some research skills and frustrations that go along with that, what do you think are the other things? Obviously content knowledge, more information about such an important time in our history, World War II, but what are some other things that more on the softer continuum of learning skills that kids come away from?
I think an appreciation for service.
Which is really a big part of our mission.
Yes, absolutely. This war was so massive in our history and required so much sacrifice from so many people, whether you were fighting in the war or you were a young person back in Hingham collecting scrap metal, or you were a mother who was trying to keep up with feeding your family on rations. There was a lot of sacrifice involved, and there were complications to those sacrifices.
And fewer people who can remember that from their own experience.
Right, of course. And so I think that for our students, an understanding of an appreciation for that sacrifice and the challenges that are created by the types of things that our nation required of its citizens at that time is important. I also think that this helps build community, unity within the community.
Pride in your own local history.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of Hingham pride at Hingham High School, for sure. All it takes is a quick trip out to one of our games, or to come into the halls during Spirit Week. But I also think that a connection to the town itself and a realization that there are so many resources in this town and this community, especially willing to help too. Even for me, it's been quite an experience to be able to reach out to so many different entities, whether it's doing some research on demographics in the town clerk's office and asking Eileen McCracken for some help, or asking Keith German to help me with some information that he might have on the veterans of our town. Or just other people who have heard about the project. So one of our students who was part of this project in the spring, she wrote a letter to the editor that was published in the Hingham Journal saying, we're looking for this information and we'd love to have your input and help. And sure enough, somebody called, Mr. Lincoln, and he was generous enough to come in one morning and to speak to my students about what it was like to be at home during those years. And I think that those kinds of connections are really rich. Students also had access to the archives of the Hingham Journal. All of those are on microfilm.
All those photos that they have.
Right?
Yes.
All of that's at the Hingham Public Library. So also kind of the recognition that it's not always all on Google, right?
Yes.
And that sometimes you need to get to the library, and even I was a little rusty on the microfilm. I had to kind of remember how to do that. But it's neat to scroll through all those old stories, and to dig through this history and to look at the old stories and see places that you recognize or names that you recognize. There are many names in Hingham that have been here for several generations.
So the applications are open or almost open for year 3?
They are.
And you're going to apply for year 3?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know if I'd be lucky enough to get in for a third year, but this third year is focused on the Pacific. And so the program this year would start in San Francisco, and actually it's going to be a collaboration between the American Battle Monuments Commission, which runs the cemeteries abroad, as well as the organization that runs the national cemeteries here in the States. And so they'll start in San Francisco at the Presidio, and then they'll head to Pearl Harbor. There's a huge cemetery there, Punch Bowl, that has many American service members there. And then go to the Philippines, where there is the largest ABMC cemetery.
But all of those things are going to be on the website, whether you're part of it or not, so you can keep in touch that way.
Yes.
Okay, we're coming to the end here, and I always ask my guests if there's something that you really need to tell the folks at home that I haven't asked you about. So this is your chance.
Sure. Well, I'm just so grateful to National History Day and the ABMC and everyone involved in the project for my opportunity to be part of it, but also to the Hingham Public Schools for being so supportive of it, and the HEF and all of the community members who have participated and helped my students, and also for the enthusiasm from our students in this project. they all knew that I was doing this research, and they were interested and engaged and would ask throughout the year, so how is your research going on Rose? And oh, tell us more about Clark. I saw that he was featured on the Facebook page today, or whatever. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity myself, but also how this has helped invigorate what's happening in my classroom. So.
Well, we're grateful that you're part of our team, and grateful certainly that you're here today, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you
and
for
we'll look forward to the
asking.
next chapters. Particularly interested in how the elective course goes, and the interest in it, and I'll be watching to hear from that.
I'm excited about
Thank
it.
you
Thank
very
you.
much. And I would say thank you as well to those of you who are viewing this episode of the Superintendent Spotlight. Our next episode, date to be determined, will be about our school resource officers and security training and all the kinds of things that are coming up in the next school year. So thank you for joining us.